Snowflakes danced in the air, catching the golden light of New York City's Christmas decorations. The streets throbbed with holiday excitement. Families were wrapped in warm layers of scarves and coats. Couples strolled arm in arm beneath strings of twinkling lights, and children pointed at the festive window displays of snowmen and reindeer. A black Range Rover pulled to a stop near a quiet bus shelter, just a few blocks from the dazzling Rockefeller Christmas tree. Michael Carter emerged first, a tall and commanding figure. His dark overcoat brushed against the sharp lines of his navy suit. He reached out a hand, and a little girl with sunshine-colored curls hopped down into the fresh snow. "Stay close, sweetheart," he said softly, adjusting her white knit hat. "We're going to see the big tree, then head home for hot chocolate." "Okay, Daddy," Kelly chirped, holding his hand tightly. The city was pure magic that night. Christmas Eve always had that effect. But Michael's eyes held a distant look, as though the holiday lights couldn't quite penetrate a certain sadness. It had been 2 years since he lost his wife. And while he tried his best to put on a happy face for Kelly, the ache in his heart never fully went away. They walked slowly past the glowing shop windows, Kelly chattering about Santa Claus and how many cookies they should leave out by the fireplace. Suddenly, she stopped, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Daddy, why is that lady sleeping there?" Michael turned to see where Kelly was pointing, toward the old wooden bench at the edge of the bus stop. There, huddled beneath the flickering bus route sign, was a young woman. She looked barely 20. Her blonde hair was a mess, tangled with falling snowflakes. She wore a thin, worn-out sweater that barely reached her elbows. Clutched tightly in her arms was something bundled in fabric. Michael stepped forward slightly, squinting to get a better look. It was a baby, wrapped in a thin, frayed blanket. The infant lay still, cheeks red from the biting cold, tiny fingers poking out and trembling in the wind. Michael's heart clenched. He instinctively reached for Kelly's hand to keep walking. They were strangers, after all. The city was full of sad stories you couldn't fix, but Kelly resisted, pulling back. "Daddy," she said again, this time more insistently, her eyes wide with concern. "She has a baby. He's so little. Daddy, he's cold." Michael looked down at his daughter. Her small face was filled with such earnest concern. He hesitated for a moment, his breath visible in the frosty air, his mind caught between logic and emotion. 2 years earlier, Sarah would have already been kneeling beside that bench, offering help without a second thought. His late wife had possessed that rare gift of immediate compassion, one that didn't consider risk or convenience, one that simply saw a need and responded. Kelly seemed to have inherited that same instinct. Without a word, Michael slowly bent down and began to unwrap the soft red scarf from around Kelly's neck. She said nothing, just watched as her father walked toward the sleeping woman. Kneeling beside the bench, Michael gently laid the scarf over the baby, careful not to startle either of them. The infant stirred slightly, his lips moving in his sleep. Michael glanced up at the young woman. Her skin was pale, almost blue around her lips. She clutched the child even tighter, even in unconsciousness, as if instinctively protecting him. He reached out a hand and touched her shoulder lightly. "Miss," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Miss, you can't stay out here tonight." She didn't respond. Michael leaned closer, his concern deepening. His voice cracked slightly. "Please wake up." The wind picked up, sending a shiver down his spine. In the distance, a chorus of carolers could faintly be heard singing Silent Night. And yet, nothing about this moment felt silent. He glanced back and saw Kelly watching him, not with fear, but with hope. A memory flashed through his mind. Sarah in the hospital, her hand weak in his, whispering, "Promise me you'll show her how to be kind, Michael. Promise me you'll teach her that kindness matters more than anything." He turned back to the young woman, still kneeling, determination settling into his features. Grace Miller awoke with a jolt of panic. The cold was the first thing she noticed, sharp and biting. Then came the fear. Her arms tightened around the bundle in her chest, her baby. Her eyes snapped open. Snow was falling heavily now, Her back ached from the hard, frozen bench. But what startled her most was the tall man kneeling beside her, the scent of expensive cologne and city air clinging to him. He was dressed in a tailored coat and leather gloves, and he was holding something in his arms, her baby. "No," she gasped, lunging forward. "Give him back to me." The man didn't flinch. His voice was calm and steady. "He's freezing. You need to come inside." She tried to stand, her legs trembling beneath her. "I don't need your pity." Michael Carter studied her. Young, barely 20. Her blonde hair was matted and crusted with frost. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her sweater was stretched thin and worn, but it was her eyes that caught his attention. Defiant, desperate, exhausted. The baby stirred weakly. Michael adjusted the scarf, his daughter's scarf, around the infant's small body. The child's skin was pale, his lips tinged with blue. "I'm not offering pity," he said. "I'm offering warmth." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she fought them back. "People only help when they want something. I've learned that the hard way." A gust of wind whipped around them. The baby let out a weak, wheezing cough, then another. Michael stood, holding the baby tighter. "You can come or not, but I'm not leaving him out here to freeze." For a moment, Grace didn't move. Her arms ached for her son. Every part of her screamed to grab him back and run. But something in the man's eyes stopped her. They weren't cruel. They weren't suspicious. They were kind like a father. She took a hesitant step forward. "His name is Noah," she whispered. Michael nodded. "I'm Michael. I have a hotel a few blocks from here. You can stay there tonight." She glanced down at her soaked shoes, then back at her baby, swaddled in a borrowed scarf, held by a stranger. But her feet moved. She followed. "A hotel?" Grace asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "What kind of hotel?" Michael glanced over his shoulder as they walked toward the Range Rover where Kelly waited. "The kind I own," he said simply. "The Archer on 5th. My daughter and I will take you there, get you settled, and make sure you and Noah have everything you need for tonight. No strings attached." Grace stopped walking. People always say that. No strings. But there are always strings. Michael turned to face her, snow gathering on his shoulders. "The only string," he said, "is that it's Christmas Eve. It's freezing out here, and your son needs to be warm. Nothing else." A small voice called from the Range Rover, "Daddy, is the baby coming with us?" Michael looked back at Kelly, then to Grace, his gaze steady. "That's up to his mother." Inside the Range Rover, the world felt unreal, warm, and eerily quiet. Grace curled up in the back seat, watching every move as Michael adjusted Noah's blanket. A little girl peeked over the seat, studying her with wide, curious eyes. "She's so young," Grace murmured. "She's 4, Michael replied, catching her gaze in the rearview mirror. "Her name's Kelly." Grace nodded. "She's beautiful." For a moment, silence settled. Then Kelly asked softly, "What's your baby's name?" "Noah," Grace said. Kelly smiled. "He's really tiny, like a snowflake." Michael's eyes flicked to the mirror again. Grace was staring out the window, but he saw the shimmer of unshed tears. The Archer Hotel rose before them, elegant and imposing, its limestone facade gleaming under the lights. Grace's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. The gleaming brass revolving doors, the polished marble floors, the crystal chandeliers in the lobby. This wasn't just any hotel. This was luxury. The staff greeted Michael with deference. "Mr. Carter, welcome back, sir." Michael nodded, guiding Grace toward a private elevator, his hand hovering near her back but not quite touching. "We need the Aspen suite prepared, James. Extra towels, warm meals sent up, and a bassinet if we have one." "Right away, Mr. Carter." The elevator doors closed, and Grace felt her heart pounding in her chest. She clutched Noah tighter. "Who are you?" she whispered. Michael looked down at Kelly, who was leaning against his leg, already half asleep. "Just someone who couldn't walk by," he said quietly. The suite was warm and spacious, with plush furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-covered city. Grace stood awkwardly in the center of the room, afraid to touch anything, afraid this moment would disappear. Michael gently placed Kelly on a couch and covered her with his coat before turning to Grace. "The bedroom is through there," he said, pointing to a doorway. "There's a bathroom with a shower. Room service will bring food. Is there anything specific Noah needs?" Grace looked down at her son, who was finally warming up, his cheeks regaining some color. He needs formula and diapers." Michael nodded. "I'll have them sent up right away." "Why are you doing this?" Grace asked suddenly, her voice cracking. Michael was quiet for a moment, looking out at the falling snow. 2 years ago, my wife died giving birth to our second child. The baby didn't survive either." Grace's eyes widened slightly. "I'm not trying to replace them," Michael continued, "but I know what it's like to be alone on Christmas Eve." Before Grace could respond, a knock came at the door. A hotel employee wheeled in a cart with covered dishes, baby supplies, and fresh towels. Once they were alone again, Michael gently lifted Kelly. "We'll let you rest," he said. "There's a phone by the bed if you need anything. Just dial 0. Grace felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. "You're leaving?" Michael nodded. "We live just a few blocks away. You need space, privacy. We'll check on you tomorrow." For a moment, Grace wanted to beg him to stay, afraid of being alone, afraid the sanctuary would vanish. Instead, she straightened her shoulders. "Thank you," she managed. Michael paused at the door, Kelly sleepy against his shoulder. "Merry Christmas, Grace," he said softly. And then they were gone. Grace had once believed in fairy tales, before her life fell apart. She had been a sophomore at a liberal arts college, majoring in fine arts. She loved drawing people, places, the fleeting moments in between. Her professors praised her work. Then came the bomb, the promises, the mistakes, the positive pregnancy test. When she told him, he disappeared. When she told her family, strict, religious, and unyielding, they gave her an ultimatum. "You've brought shame into this house," her mother had said. "If you keep it, you leave." So she left. No money, no support. Just a child she hadn't been ready for, but couldn't abandon. She bounced between shelters, then the streets. Food went to Noah. Coats were wrapped around him. Every night was a fight for survival. Christmas Eve was just another night to get through. Until now. Standing in the elegant hotel bathroom, Grace stared at her reflection in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. Thin face, hollow cheeks, dark circles under her eyes. She looked older than her 20 years, worn down by months of struggle. With trembling hands, she turned on the shower, letting the room fill with steam. For the first time in weeks, she put Noah down, placing him on a bed of towels just outside the shower door where she could keep an eye on him. He slept peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling. The hot water felt like salvation, washing away the grime of the streets, the cold that had settled deep in her bones. She wept then, silently, letting the water mix with her tears, grateful that Noah couldn't see his mother break down. After the shower, wrapped in a plush hotel robe, Grace sat on the edge of the bed, feeding Noah with the formula the hotel had provided. The warmth, the quiet, the safety, it felt dangerous to accept, dangerous to believe. When Noah finished eating, his eyes growing heavy again, Grace laid him in the center of the king-sized bed, building a barrier of pillows around him. Then she curled up beside him, one hand resting on his chest, afraid to fully fall asleep. But exhaustion won, and for the first time in months, Grace Miller slept deeply without fear of what the night might bring. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight reflecting off the fresh snow. Grace woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. Then she felt the soft mattress beneath her, saw the elegant room around her, and remembered the man, Michael Carter, and his daughter with the golden curls. Noah stirred beside her, making small, hungry sounds. As she prepared his formula, a knock came at the door. Grace froze, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. She approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. A small face with blue eyes and blonde curls stared back, standing on tiptoes to reach the peephole. Grace opened the door slowly to find Kelly clutching a gift bag with red tissue paper poking out the top. "Merry Christmas," Kelly announced. "I brought presents for Noah." Behind her stood a woman in her 60s, elegant and poised, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She wore a wool coat and a disapproving expression. "Miss Miller," the woman said stiffly. "I'm Mrs. Margaret Hill, the Carters' housekeeper. I apologize for the intrusion." Miss Kelly insisted on delivering her gifts. Grace clutched her robe tighter, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. It's okay," she said, stepping back to let them in. Kelly bounded into the room, heading straight for the bed where Noah lay. "Look how tiny his fingers are," she exclaimed in wonder. Mrs. Hill remained by the door, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the suite, noting the untouched food trays from the night before, the baby supplies, Grace's worn clothes draped over a chair. "Mr. Carter asked me to check if you needed anything," she said, her tone formal but not unkind. Grace felt herself shrinking under the woman's gaze. "We're fine," she said quickly. "Please thank him for everything. We'll be out of your way soon." Mrs. Hill's expression softened slightly. "There's no rush, Miss Miller. The suite is paid for through the week." Grace's eyes widened. A week in this luxury would cost more than she had seen in months. "I can't accept that," she said automatically. Mrs. Hill looked at her for a long moment. "Pride is a luxury of those who have options, Miss Miller. Sometimes acceptance is the braver choice." Before Grace could respond, Kelly called from the bed. "Can Noah come see our tree? It's really big and has lights that change colors." Mrs. Hill sighed. "Miss Kelly, I'm sure Miss Miller and her baby have plans." Grace looked at the little girl's hopeful face, then back to Mrs. Hill. "Actually, we don't have any plans," she said softly. Kelly's face lit up. "So you'll come?" Mrs. Hill's mouth formed a thin line. "That would be Mr. Carter's decision," she said, as if summoned by his name. Another knock came at the door. Mrs. Hill opened it to reveal Michael, dressed casually in a sweater and jeans, looking so different from his formal appearance the night before. "I thought I might find you two here," he said with a small smile, first to Mrs. Hill, then to Kelly, his eyes finally settling on Grace. "Merry Christmas," he said warmly. Grace suddenly felt painfully aware of her situation, standing in a borrowed robe in a hotel room she couldn't afford, with a man whose kindness she couldn't understand. "I'm sorry about this," Michael said, gesturing to Kelly and Mrs. Hill. Kelly was determined to deliver her gifts. "Daddy," Kelly interjected, "can they come see our tree, please?" Michael looked at Grace, his expression gentle but questioning. "That's entirely up to Grace," he said. When all eyes turned to her, Grace felt the weight of the moment, of the choice. She could retreat, protect herself and Noah from further involvement, from the inevitable disappointment when this fairy tale ended. Or she could step forward, accept one more kindness, one more moment of warmth. She thought of the night ahead, alone in this beautiful room, and then the nights after that, back on the streets when the week was over. "That would be nice," she heard herself say. "If it's not too much trouble." Kelly clapped her hands with excitement. Mrs. Hill's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a warning that Grace understood perfectly. "Don't get attached. Don't expect more. We live just a few blocks away," Michael said. "Whenever you're ready." Grace looked down at her worn clothes, suddenly embarrassed. I don't have anything appropriate to wear." Michael seemed to understand her discomfort. "The hotel boutique is open today," he said. "Feel free to find something there. Just tell them to charge it to the Aspen Suite." "I can't let you do that," Grace protested. Michael's expression was kind but firm. "Consider it a Christmas gift for both of you." An hour later, Grace stood in the hotel lobby wearing new jeans, a soft cream-colored sweater, and a warm coat. Noah was bundled in a new snowsuit, tiny mittens covering his hands. The boutique attendant had helped her select everything, never once making her feel like charity. Michael and Kelly waited for her by the revolving doors, Kelly bouncing with excitement. Outside, the Range Rover idled at the curb, its engine a soft hum in the Christmas morning quiet. The ride was short but significant. Each block they traveled showed Grace a world she had once belonged to and lost. The world of comfort, of security, of belonging. When they pulled up to a luxury high-rise overlooking Central Park, Grace's breath caught. "This is where you live?" she asked, unable to hide her awe. Michael nodded, helping Kelly out of the car. "For the past 5 years, yes." A doorman greeted them warmly. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Carter." "And Miss Kelly." "Merry Christmas, Thomas," Kelly replied, reaching for Grace's hand as they entered the lobby. The elevator ride to the penthouse was smooth and silent. Grace felt as though she was floating upward, away from reality, into some dream she didn't dare believe. Noah stirred against her chest, his eyes opening to take in the strange new surroundings. When the elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, Grace froze. Warm light spilled across polished hardwood floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a sweeping view of the snow-covered park and the city beyond. In the corner stood a towering Christmas tree, glowing with gold and red ornaments. It looked like a scene from a movie. Her breath caught in her throat. Michael stepped out carrying Noah. Kelly skipped ahead, calling, "Come on, this is our home." Grace hovered in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly. She didn't step inside. Michael noticed her hesitation. "You're safe here," he said gently. Something in his voice, the quiet understanding in his words, broke through Grace's defenses. She stepped forward into the warmth, into the light. The morning unfolded like a dream. Kelly showed Grace every ornament on the tree, explaining each one's history with the solemnity of a museum curator. Mrs. Hill prepared a Christmas breakfast of pancakes shaped like stars, crisp bacon, and fresh orange juice. Michael moved through it all with quiet grace, attentive but not overwhelming. After breakfast, they gathered in the living room where presents waited under the tree. "Santa came," Kelly exclaimed, her eyes wide with wonder. Grace sat on the edge of a plush armchair, Noah sleeping peacefully in her arms, watching as Kelly tore through colorful packages. Each gift was met with genuine delight: books, toys, a child-sized easel with paints. Grace's heart ached with a bittersweet mix of joy for Kelly and sorrow for what Noah might never have. As if reading her thoughts, Michael appeared beside her, holding a small wrapped package. "This is for Noah," he said softly. "And there's something for you too." Grace stared at the package, unable to speak. Her fingers trembled as she took it, carefully balancing Noah in one arm. Inside was a tiny silver rattle, elegant and simple. "It was Kelly's when she was a baby," Michael explained. "I thought Noah might like it." Grace felt tears threatening again, but she held them back. "Thank you," she managed. Michael nodded toward another package on a side table. "That one's yours if you'd like to open it." Curious, Grace walked to the table. The package was flat and rectangular, wrapped in simple silver paper. With care, she unwrapped it, revealing a leather-bound sketchbook and a set of professional drawing pencils. She looked up at Michael in surprise. "Kelly mentioned you were an art student," he explained. "I thought you might like to draw again." Grace ran her fingers over the smooth leather cover, the high-quality paper within. It had been so long since she'd held proper art supplies, so long since she had allowed herself to create rather than simply survive. For the first time since entering the penthouse, she smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said, and this time her voice was steady. The day continued with quiet, simple moments. Kelly showed Grace her room, her toys, her books. Michael prepared hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows. Mrs. Hill moved efficiently through it all, her initial stiffness gradually softening as she watched Grace gently care for Noah, never asking for anything, expressing gratitude for every small kindness. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the snow-covered park, Grace found herself alone with Michael in the kitchen, while Kelly napped and Noah slept in a makeshift bassinet fashioned from a drawer and soft blankets. "You have a beautiful home," Grace said, breaking the comfortable silence. And a beautiful family. Michael smiled, though the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Thank you. It's been just Kelly and me for 2 years now. Grace hesitated, then asked, Your wife? Michael nodded, looking out at the park. Sarah. She died in childbirth. There were complications. We lost both her and the baby. I'm so sorry, Grace whispered. Michael turned to her, his gaze direct but gentle. And you? How did you end up on that bench? Grace looked down at her hands, at the pencil she'd been holding from the set he'd given her. For a moment, she considered deflecting, offering the simplified version of her story. But something about his honesty, his willingness to share his own pain, made her brave. I was a sophomore at Parsons' fine arts major. I had a scholarship. Then I got pregnant, and everything fell apart. She told him everything. The boyfriend who vanished, the parents who chose their reputation over their daughter, the months of shelters and street corners, of protecting Noah at all costs. Michael listened without interruption, his face showing a mixture of concern and compassion, but never pity. When she finished, he simply said, You're incredibly brave, Grace. She shook her head. Brave would have been finding a way to make it work. Brave would have been not ending up on that bench. No, Michael countered. Brave is choosing your child over security. Brave is surviving when everything is against you. Brave is accepting help when it's offered, even when pride says no. Not to. Their eyes locked, and for a fleeting moment, a deep understanding passed between them. Here were two souls, each having suffered a unique loss, yet both intimately acquainted with the searing pain of having their lives irrevocably altered in the blink of an eye. The fragile connection was abruptly severed by Noah's sudden cry from the living room. Grace reacted without hesitation, her body instinctively responding to her child's distress. Michael watched her go, a subtle shift in his expression betraying his inner thoughts. Later that evening, as darkness enveloped the city and the twinkling lights painted a mesmerizing backdrop against the night sky, Michael approached Grace as she stood gazing out the windows, Noah nestled peacefully against her shoulder. I have a proposal, he stated, choosing his words with care. Grace immediately tensed, her defenses rising like a shield. Michael seemed to sense her apprehension. Not that kind of proposal, he quickly clarified. An offer. I own a guest house on my estate in Connecticut. It's completely private and fully furnished. You and Noah could stay there, just until you get back on your feet. A month, maybe. No obligations, no expectations. Grace fixed her gaze upon him, searching for any hidden agenda, any ulterior motive lurking beneath the surface. Why? She finally asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Why would you do that for someone you've just met? Michael paused, taking a moment to carefully consider his response. Before Sarah passed away, she made me promise something. She made me promise to teach Kelly that kindness matters more than anything else. I haven't always been successful in keeping that promise. But when Kelly saw you and Noah last night, she reminded me of it. This isn't about charity, Grace. It's about keeping a promise. Grace lowered her gaze to Noah, studying his peaceful face and the tiny fingers curled trustingly against her shoulder. She couldn't help but think of the daunting weeks ahead, the prospect of returning to the shelters, the biting cold, and the ever-present fear that gnawed at her. 1 month, she finally conceded. And I want to work. I need to earn my keep. Michael nodded, respecting her desire for independence. We can figure that out, he agreed. Later that night, as the Carter penthouse fell silent, Grace stood in the guest bedroom where she and Noah would spend the night before their departure for Connecticut the following day. The room exuded an understated elegance, offering a breathtaking view of the twinkling city lights. She gently laid Noah in the center of the bed, carefully arranging a protective fortress of pillows around him. Then, she retrieved the sketchbook Michael had gifted her, and for the first time in months, she felt compelled to draw. She began with Noah, meticulously capturing his delicate features, the soft curve of his cheek, and the delicate fan of his eyelashes. Next, she sketched Kelly, her exuberant curls and radiant smile brought to life on the page. Finally, Almost unconsciously, she began to sketch Michael, his thoughtful eyes, the subtle hint of sadness that perpetually lingered in his expression, and the gentle way his hands cradled Noah. As she drew, something that had long been dormant within her began to stir. It wasn't just the artist's keen eye for detail, but a glimmer of hope, small and fragile, yet undeniably present. Hope that tomorrow might hold something better than yesterday. Hope that the path ahead, though uncertain, might lead to a destination far beyond that cold, unforgiving bench. She carefully closed the sketchbook and placed it on the nightstand. Then, she curled up beside Noah, her hand resting protectively on his chest, and allowed herself to dream of possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine just 24 hours earlier. The next morning dawned with a fresh blanket of snow and the promise of new beginnings. Grace packed the few belongings they now possessed. The clothes from the hotel boutique, the sketchbook and pencils, and Noah's new rattle. It wasn't much, but it was a significant improvement over what they had just 2 days ago. Mrs. Hill appeared at her door, her expression noticeably softer than the day before. "The car will be ready in an hour, Miss Miller. I've prepared some breakfast for you in the kitchen." "Thank you, Mrs. Hill," Grace replied. The older woman hesitated for a moment before adding, "Mr. Carter is a good man, sometimes too good for his own welfare. He sees the best in people even when they might not deserve it." Grace understood the underlying warning in her words. "I don't intend to take advantage of his kindness," she stated quietly. Mrs. Hill studied her intently for a moment. "I believe you don't," she finally conceded. "But intentions and outcomes aren't always the same thing." Before Grace could respond, Noah began to fuss. Mrs. Hill nodded once and departed, her message delivered. In the kitchen, Grace found Michael already dressed casually in a sweater and jeans, assisting Kelly with her breakfast. The scene felt strangely domestic, almost painfully normal, evoking a sense of family that Grace had never experienced with her own child. Michael looked up as she entered, his smile radiating warmth. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" Grace nodded, settling Noah in her arms as she took a seat at the island. "Better than I have in months, thank you." Breakfast was simple yet delicious. Warm croissants, fresh fruit, and steaming coffee. Kelly enthusiastically chatted about the guest house, describing its features with the confidence of someone who considered it her personal domain. "There's a pond with ducks and a big tree with a swing, and in the summer there are flowers everywhere." Grace listened attentively, trying to envision their new temporary home, while cautiously guarding her heart against becoming too attached to the image. As they prepared to leave, Michael's phone rang. His expression immediately shifted as he answered, becoming professional and focused. "Victor," he said, his voice taking on an edge Grace hadn't heard before. "Yes, I understand the urgency. No, it can't wait until tomorrow." He covered the phone with his hand and offered an apologetic glance to Grace and Kelly. "I'm sorry. This is important. A business matter that can't wait. Mrs. Hill will take you both to Connecticut. I'll join you tomorrow." Grace experienced a strange pang of disappointment but nodded in understanding. "Of course. Thank you again for everything." Michael knelt down to hug Kelly goodbye, whispering something in her ear that made her giggle. Then he straightened up, his eyes meeting Grace's. "You're doing the right thing," he said softly. "For both of you." Grace knew he was referring to her decision to accept his help, to embrace this chance. She desperately wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. As the elevator doors closed, separating them from Michael and the penthouse, Grace felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. The fairy tale wasn't over yet, but the harsh realities of life were beginning to seep in around the edges. She clutched Noah closer, inhaling his sweet baby scent. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as they always had. The drive to Connecticut stretched out before them, carrying Grace and Noah farther away from the city that had simultaneously been their prison and their home for so many months. Through the window of the Range Rover, Grace watched as the urban landscape gradually transformed into suburbs, and then into the rolling hills and bare winter trees of rural Connecticut. Kelly had fallen asleep beside her, exhausted by the excitement of Christmas and the anticipation of showing Grace and Noah their new temporary home. Mrs. Hill drove in silence, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror, as if confirming that Grace was still there, still real. The Carter estate emerged suddenly around a bend in the road, imposing stone gates that opened onto a long tree-lined drive leading up to a magnificent stone manor house. Grace gasped at the sight. This wasn't merely wealth. This was generational prosperity, the kind she had only ever witnessed in movies. Mrs. Hill didn't drive to the main house, however. Instead, she followed a smaller path that branched off from the main drive, winding through a grove of bare maple trees to a clearing where a charming two-story cottage stood. It was smaller than the manor, but still substantial. A stone and timber structure adorned with large windows and a wraparound porch. "This is the guest house," Mrs. Hill explained, parking in front. It was originally the caretaker's cottage. Mr. Carter had it renovated a few years ago. Grace stepped out of the car, Noah nestled securely against her chest, and gazed at what would be their home for the next month. It was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. Rustic yet elegant, inviting and solid. Kelly awoke as the car came to a stop and immediately scrambled out, eager to begin the tour. "Come see, Grace. Come see inside." The interior was even more captivating. An open floor plan with a grand stone fireplace dominating one wall, comfortable furniture in soft, neutral tones, and a kitchen boasting gleaming appliances. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub. Everything about the space spoke of thoughtful design, of creating a place that felt like home. Mrs. Hill moved efficiently through the rooms, turning on lights, adjusting thermostats, and pointing out the locations of various items. "There's food in the refrigerator and pantry," she explained. "Linens are in the closet upstairs. The phone connects directly to the main house if you need anything." Grace stood in the center of the living room, overwhelmed by gratitude. This place, this beautiful, warm place, would be theirs for an entire month. A sanctuary, a respite. "Thank you," she whispered. Mrs. Hill's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Carter asked me to make sure you and the baby have everything you need. Is there anything else?" Grace surveyed the comfort, the security, and the beauty that surrounded her. "No," she said softly, "this is more than enough." That evening, after Mrs. Hill and Kelly had returned to the main house, after Noah had been fed and bathed in the deep sink of the cottage kitchen, and after darkness had enveloped the estate, Grace stood at the windows, gazing out at the night. The moon cast a silvery glow across the snow-covered grounds, illuminating the bare branches of the trees, the gentle slope of the hills, and the distant silhouette of the main house. The scene was peaceful in a way that the city could never be, quiet in a way that stirred a deep ache within her. She thought of Michael Carter. His kindness, his gentle eyes, and the sadness that seemed to perpetually reside just beneath his smile. She thought of Kelly, bright and innocent, reaching out to Noah with such natural affection. She thought of the path that had led her here, to this moment, to this place. A month, she reminded herself. Just a month to rebuild, to plan, and to find a way forward that didn't lead back to that cold bench. With Noah sleeping soundly in a proper crib for the first time in his life, Grace returned to her sketchbook. As pencil met paper, as lines formed into shapes, and shapes transformed into images, she felt something that had long been dormant within her begin to stir. Not just the artist's skill, but the artist's hope, the unwavering belief that beauty could be created even from pain, that something meaningful could emerge from the broken pieces of a life. She drew until her eyes grew heavy, until the fire in the hearth burned down to embers, and until the moon had traversed halfway across the night sky. She drew the cottage, the trees, and the moonlit snow. She drew Noah sleeping peacefully, his tiny face relaxed in dreams. She drew hands, her own, weathered by months of hardship, Noah's, perfect and new, and, from memory, Michael's, strong and gentle as they cradled her son. Finally, she drew herself, not as she was now, thin and weary, but as she might be, could be someday. Standing tall, Noah in her arms, facing forward into the light. When she finally closed the sketchbook and made her way upstairs to bed, Grace felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. The quiet certainty that tomorrow would come, and that it might bring something other than struggle. For the first time since Noah was born, Grace Miller drifted off to sleep filled with hope. Grace Miller awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was she? Where was Noah? Then, reality flooded back. The cottage, the Carters, and the unexpected sanctuary that had appeared when she needed it most. She listened for Noah and heard his soft morning coos emanating from the crib nearby. Her son was awake but content, exploring his tiny hands in the gentle morning light. The cottage looked different in daylight, warmer somehow, more real. The polished wood floors gleamed, the stone fireplace stood solid and reassuring, and through the windows, she could see the snow-covered grounds of the Carter estate stretching toward the distant trees. This place existed outside the harsh world she'd known, like stepping into a painting of how life could be. Grace tiptoed over to Noah, lifting him into her arms and breathing in his sweet scent. "Good morning, little one," she whispered against his downy head. "What do you think of our new temporary home?" Noah responded with a gurgle and a wave of his tiny fist. Grace smiled, a genuine smile that felt strange on her face after so many months of carefully maintained stoicism. Downstairs, Grace found the kitchen fully stocked, just as Mrs. Hill had promised. Fresh milk, eggs, bread, fruit, and coffee. She prepared breakfast with Noah balanced on her hip, marveling at the simple luxury of having food readily available, of not having to calculate every morsel, and of being able to eat until she was satisfied. As she ate, Noah content in her lap, Grace's mind turned to Michael's offer from yesterday. 1 month in this cottage, 1 month to rebuild, and 1 month to find her way forward. But he had also agreed that she should work, should earn her keep. Grace's pride demanded it. She couldn't simply accept charity, even from someone as kind as Michael Carter. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Kelly bouncing on the porch, bundled in a pink snowsuit, with Mrs. Hill standing behind her, wearing a resigned expression. "Can Grace come play in the snow?" Kelly asked Mrs. Hill for the dozenth time. "That's up to Miss Miller," Mrs. Hill replied, her tone softening slightly when she saw Grace with Noah in her arms. "Good morning. I trust you slept well." Grace nodded, stepping back to invite them in from the cold. "Very well, thank you. Everything is perfect." Mrs. Hill's lips thinned in what might have been a smile. "Mr. Carter called this morning. His business in the city is taking longer than expected. He asked me to ensure you're settling in." Kelly tugged at Grace's sweater. "Can we show Noah the pond? It's frozen over and looks like magic." Grace looked down at the eager child, then at Mrs. Hill, uncertain of the protocol. Mrs. Hill seemed to understand her hesitation. "The estate is quite safe, Miss Miller. You're welcome to explore the grounds. Just stay within sight of either house." Grace felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment at the news of Michael's delayed arrival. Relief because his presence unsettled her in ways she wasn't ready to examine, and disappointment because what? Because she wanted to thank him again, because Kelly clearly missed her father, and because the cottage, for all its charm, felt somehow incomplete without him. "Let me bundle Noah up," she told Kelly. "Then we can go see your magical pond." The morning unfolded in a series of small, perfect moments that Grace tucked away in her memory like treasures. Kelly leading her through snowy paths, explaining the estate's geography with a child's absolute authority. Noah's wide eyes taking in the bright winter world, the frozen pond, silvery and still beneath bare willow branches, and Kelly's delight when a family of deer appeared at the forest's edge, watching them curiously before bounding away. For a few hours, Grace allowed herself to forget. Forget the streets, forget the shelters, and forget the uncertainty that waited beyond this month-long reprieve. She allowed herself to simply be a young woman enjoying a winter morning with 2 children, one hers by birth, and one hers for the moment, through some strange twist of fate. When they returned to the cottage, their cheeks flushed with cold, Mrs. Hill had prepared lunch. Warm soup and fresh bread that filled the small house with comforting aromas. To Grace's surprise, the older woman joined them at the table, her usual formalities softening just slightly. "You have a way with Miss Kelly," Mrs. Hill observed, watching as the child carefully fed herself without spilling. "She's not usually so composed." Grace smiled, adjusting Noah in her arms as she fed him his bottle. "She's a wonderful girl, very thoughtful." Mrs. Hill nodded, something unreadable crossing her expression. "She's had a difficult time since her mother passed. Mr. Carter has done his best, but—" The sentence hung unfinished, but Grace understood. The absence of a mother left a particular kind of void, one that even the most devoted father couldn't quite fill. After lunch, Kelly reluctantly returned to the main house with Mrs. Hill for her afternoon nap. Grace stood on the porch, watching them go, feeling an unexpected emptiness once they disappeared from view. The cottage seemed suddenly quiet, almost too quiet. With Noah settled for his own nap, Grace took out her sketchbook and began to draw. The images flowed more freely now. The pond, the deer, and Kelly's bright face as she pointed out a cardinal against the snow. Her fingers remembered their old skill, and her eyes found the details that made each scene unique. For the first time in months, Grace lost herself in creation rather than survival. Later that afternoon, a different knock came at the door, firmer and more authoritative. Grace opened it to find a man in a crisp suit standing on the porch, his expression coolly professional. "Miss Miller, I'm Jason Evans, Mr. Carter's assistant. He asked me to deliver these to you." He held out a sleek laptop and a folder of papers. Grace took them hesitantly. "Thank you, but I'm not sure I understand. Mr. Carter mentioned you were interested in working during your stay. He thought these might help." The folder contains information about remote positions with Carter Investments. Administrative support, data entry, basic graphic design, jobs that could be done from here. The computer is for your use if you decide to pursue any of them. Grace stared at the items in her hands, a complex mix of emotions rising in her chest. This wasn't charity. This was opportunity. A chance to work, to contribute, and to rebuild her independence without leaving Noah or this safe haven. "That's very thoughtful of him," she managed. Jason nodded, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "Mr. Carter also asked me to inform you that he should return tomorrow afternoon. Is there anything you need in the meantime?" Grace shook her head, still processing this new development. "No, thank you. We have everything we need." After Jason left, Grace settled on the couch with the laptop and folder. The positions were real, legitimate remote work opportunities that matched her skills. The pay was fair, perhaps even generous, and each job description noted flexible hours, understanding that her primary responsibility was to her child. Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. Michael Carter had found a way to honor her pride while still offering help. He'd created a path that allowed her dignity alongside support. The kindness of it, the thoughtfulness, touched something deep within her that she'd thought long frozen by months of hardship. That evening, after feeding Noah and settling him in his crib, Grace sent an email applying for the graphic design position. It was the most aligned with her education, with the artist she'd once been, and with the woman she hoped to become again. Then, she returned to her sketchbook, drawing until her eyes grew heavy, filling page after page with images of the day, and with the first tentative visions of a future that might hold more than mere survival. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Grace woke early, a nervous energy propelling her through the morning routine with Noah. She cleaned the already clean cottage, arranged and rearranged the few belongings they had, and checked her email repeatedly for a response to her application. The thought of Michael's return filled her with an anticipation she couldn't quite name. Around noon, Kelly appeared at the door, her smile wide and excited. "Daddy's home," she announced. "He wants to know if you'll come for dinner at the big house tonight." Grace felt her heart skip a beat. From surprise, she told herself. "Nothing more." "That would be lovely," she replied, trying to keep her voice casual for Kelly's sake. "What time should we come?" Kelly declared. "And Daddy says to bring your drawings. He wants to see them." After Kelly left, Grace stood in the cottage living room, suddenly aware of her limited wardrobe, of her unstyled hair, and of all the ways she was unprepared for dinner at the big house. The insecurity was familiar and unwelcome, a reminder of the gulf between her current circumstances and the world the Carters inhabited so naturally. She pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't about impressing anyone. This was simply dinner with the man who had helped her, whose home she was temporarily sharing, nothing more. Still, when she dressed that evening, she took extra care, styling her hair, applying the minimal makeup that had come with her purchases from the hotel boutique, and selecting the nicest outfit from her small collection. Noah, too, was carefully dressed in the softest of his new clothes, his fine hair gently combed. At precisely 6 o'clock, Grace stood at the massive front door of the main house, Noah in her arms, and sketchbook tucked under one arm. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal Michael Carter. He looked different here in this setting, more relaxed than he had in the city, dressed in a simple sweater and dark jeans. His hair slightly tousled, but his eyes were the same, kind, thoughtful, with that ever-present shadow of sadness. Grace, he greeted her warmly. And Noah, welcome. Please come in. The main house was even more impressive inside. Soaring ceilings, elegant furnishings, and artwork that Grace immediately recognized as museum quality. Yet, for all its grandeur, it felt surprisingly welcoming, lived in, and like a home rather than a showcase. Kelly came running from somewhere deeper in the house, launching herself at her father's legs before turning her bright smile to Grace. "You came," she exclaimed as if there had been any doubt. "Come see the dining room. We have candles and everything." Michael's smile as he watched his daughter was full of gentle amusement and love. "She's been preparing for this dinner all day," he confided to Grace as they followed the excited child. "I think we have enough candles lit to be visible from space." The dining room was indeed awash in candlelight, with tapers and silver holders and votives clustered in the center of the table, creating an effect that was both elegant and whimsical. Mrs. Hill moved efficiently around the space, making final adjustments to what appeared to be an elaborate meal. "I hope you like roast chicken," Michael said as he pulled out a chair for Grace. "It's Kelly's favorite." "It looks wonderful," Grace replied, settling Noah on her lap. "Everything does." Dinner unfolded with surprising ease, the conversation flowing naturally. Kelly provided much of the entertainment with stories of her adventures showing Grace and Noah around the estate. Michael listened attentively to his daughter, his affection for her evident in every glance, every gentle correction, and every shared smile. Grace watched their interaction, feeling both warmed by it and achingly aware of what Noah might never have. A father who looked at him with such love, who built his world around his child's happiness. After the main course, as Mrs. Hill cleared the plates, Michael turned to Grace. "Kelly mentioned you've been drawing again." Grace suddenly felt self-conscious, aware of the modest sketchbook beside her chair. "Just a little. It helps pass the time." "May I see?" Michael asked, his tone genuinely interested. Grace hesitated, then nodded, passing him the sketchbook. She watched his face as he turned the pages, carefully studying each drawing. His expression subtly changed. Surprise flickered across his features, followed by appreciation, and then something deeper that she couldn't quite define. "These are extraordinary, Grace," he said finally, looking up and meeting her gaze. "You truly have remarkable talent." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "I was studying fine arts before everything changed," she explained, feeling a need to clarify. Michael nodded, turning to another page. It was a sketch of Kelly at the frozen pond, her expression perfectly captured, the joy and wonder of childhood distilled into a few careful lines. "What would you have done if things had been different?" he asked softly. The question caught Grace off guard. It had been so long since anyone had inquired about her dreams, her ambitions, the person she'd been before she became simply Noah's mother, simply a survivor. "I wanted to be an illustrator," she admitted, a hint of longing in her voice. "Children's books, maybe, or magazines. I loved capturing moments, telling stories through images." Michael studied another drawing. This one depicted Noah sleeping, his tiny face peaceful and vulnerable. "You still could," he said quietly, his gaze intense. Grace smiled, a touch of her old bitterness surfacing. "Single mothers without degrees or portfolios aren't exactly in high demand in the art world," she pointed out, stating the obvious. Michael looked up, meeting her eyes directly. You have a degree, just not a completed one. You have talent, extraordinary talent, and you have time, Grace. A month here to build a portfolio, to apply to finish your degree, to find your path back. His words held such certainty, such conviction, that for a moment, Grace allowed herself to believe them, to imagine that future. Her and Noah stable, secure, her creating art that mattered, him growing up proud of his mother, rather than ashamed of their circumstances. Before she could respond, Kelly tugged at Michael's sleeve. "Can we have dessert now, Daddy? I helped make it." The moment broke, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. But Grace felt something settle within her, a seed of possibility taking root. Later, as they moved to the living room for coffee, Michael's phone rang. His expression changed as he glanced at the screen. A subtle hardening, a shift from the relaxed host to something more guarded. "Excuse me," he said. "I need to take this." He stepped away, his voice too low for Grace to hear, but his body language spoke volumes. Tension coiled in his shoulders, a slight pacing motion, the occasional sharp gesture of his free hand. Kelly, seemingly unperturbed by her father's sudden shift in mood, showed Grace her collection of stuffed animals, each with its own elaborate backstory. Grace listened attentively, but part of her attention remained on Michael, on the frown that deepened as his call continued. When he returned, his smile seemed forced. "I apologize for the interruption. Business doesn't always respect personal time." Grace nodded, understanding more than he might realize. Before Noah, before homelessness, she'd had ambitions, too. Goals, a future mapped out that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with dreams. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly while Kelly was distracted with her toys. Michael hesitated, then sighed. "Just a persistent problem. Nothing you need to worry about." But the shadow had deepened in his eyes, and Grace wondered what burden he carried beyond the grief she already knew about. The evening ended with Michael walking Grace and Noah back to the cottage, Kelly having been put to bed by Mrs. Hill. The night was clear and cold, stars sharp against the black sky, their breath visible in the frosty air. "Thank you for dinner," Grace said as they approached the cottage. "And for the job opportunity. I sent in my application yesterday." Michael smiled, a genuine smile that lightened his features. "Jason mentioned that he was impressed with your qualifications. You should hear back tomorrow." They stood for a moment on the cottage porch, an awkward silence falling between them. Noah had fallen asleep against Grace's shoulder, his gentle breathing the only sound. Michael cleared his throat. "I meant what I said earlier, Grace, about your talent, your potential. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, but that doesn't mean the path is closed permanently." Grace looked up at him, this stranger who had become something else, not quite a friend, not quite an employer, something undefined that made her both comfortable and uneasy. "Why are you really doing all this?" she asked suddenly, the question that had lingered since that first night. The truth this time. Michael was silent for a long moment, his eyes looking past her to some middle distance. "When Sarah died," he began finally, the words seeming to catch in his throat. "I was lost, functioning but not living, going through the motions for Kelly's sake, but hollow inside. Then Christmas Eve, I saw you in Noah." And he paused, gathering his thoughts. "It wasn't pity, Grace. It was recognition of someone else who had lost their path, who was fighting to survive, to protect what mattered most. And for the first time since Sarah, I felt something other than numbness. I felt like I could help, could make a difference. It was selfish in a way. Helping you and Noah helped me remember who I wanted to be." The honesty of his answer caught Grace off guard. She had expected platitudes, expected generosity framed as virtue. This admission of mutual need, of finding purpose in their chance encounter. It felt more genuine, more human, than any explanation she'd imagined. "Well," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper, "I think we're helping each other then." Michael's smile reached his eyes this time. "I think we are." As he turned to leave, he added, "Oh, and Grace, congratulations on the job. Jason was going to call you tomorrow, But I think you deserve to know tonight. You start Monday if that works for you. Grace felt a surge of emotion. Pride, relief, gratitude. Thank you, Michael, for everything. He nodded once, then disappeared into the darkness, the sound of his footsteps crunching on snow fading gradually. Inside the cottage, Grace laid Noah in his crib, then stood at the window, watching the distant lights of the main house, thinking of the man who lived there. Michael Carter was becoming something dangerous to her. Not a threat, but a possibility. A possibility she wasn't yet ready to examine. The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings with Noah, exploring the grounds when weather permitted. Afternoons working remotely, designing simple graphics for Carter Investments' internal communications while Noah napped. Evenings drawing, reading, planning tentatively for a future beyond the month she'd been promised. Kelly visited daily, sometimes with Mrs. Hill, occasionally with Michael when his work permitted. The little girl had formed a powerful attachment to both Grace and Noah, playing peekaboo with the baby, watching with fascination as Grace drew, chattering endlessly about school and friends and the adventures she planned for when spring came. Grace found herself looking forward to these visits, particularly when Michael joined them. He carried a quiet strength and understated kindness that created a sense of safety she hadn't known in a very long time. Their conversations ranged from art to books to gentle debates about films. Normal, ordinary exchanges that felt extraordinary to Grace after months of having no one to talk to but Noah. But beneath this peaceful surface, Grace sensed tension. Michael's phone calls became more frequent, his expressions more troubled when he thought no one was watching. Twice he canceled plans with Kelly due to urgent business matters, leaving the child disappointed and confused. Whatever burden he carried seemed to be growing heavier. 2 weeks into their stay, Grace was working at the cottage dining table when a black town car pulled up outside. A man emerged, tall, impeccably dressed in a suit that even Grace could tell cost more than everything she'd ever owned combined. His silver hair contrasted with a deeply tanned face, his expression cold and assessing as he studied the cottage. Grace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. She watched through the window as the man approached, his confident stride speaking of someone accustomed to power, to getting his way. When the knock came, sharp and demanding, she gathered Noah from his playmat and held him close before answering. "Can I help you?" she asked through the barely open door. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Miller, I presume." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Victor Reynolds. I believe you're acquainted with my competitor, Michael Carter." Grace's guard rose immediately. Nothing about this man's presence felt benign. "Michael Carter isn't here right now," she said, beginning to close the door. Reynolds stopped it with one hand, not forcefully, but with clear intent. "I'm not here to see Michael, Miss Miller. I'm here to see you." Grace felt her heart rate increase, her arms tightening instinctively around Noah. "What do you want?" Reynolds's smile widened slightly. "To make you an offer. May I come in?" "No," Grace said firmly. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." Reynolds seemed amused by her defiance. "Direct. I appreciate that. Very well. I know your situation, Miss Miller. Former art student, homeless until Michael played White Knight on Christmas Eve. Currently working as, what? A glorified clip art designer for Carter Investments." Grace said nothing, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm prepared to offer you a more substantial position," Reynolds continued, his voice smooth as silk. "Real work with my company. Better pay, benefits for you and your child, an apartment in the city, all yours immediately." "Why would you do that?" Grace asked, her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. Reynolds's expression hardened slightly. "Let's be frank. Michael Carter is distracted. His board is concerned. His newest charity case living on his property. Rumors of impropriety. It's affecting investor confidence. My offer solves problems for everyone. You get stability, independence. Michael gets back his focus and reputation. I get, well, let's just say business advantages present themselves when opponents are distracted." Grace felt sick, her skin crawling at the implication of being reduced to a charity case. A distraction. "I'm not interested," she said coldly. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? Think carefully, Miss Miller. 1 month from now, where will you be? Back on that bench. This is a limited-time offer for a real future for you and your son." Grace straightened, finding a strength she'd forgotten she possessed. "Mr. Reynolds, I may not have much, but I have my integrity. Please leave." Reynolds's amused expression vanished, replaced by something harder, colder. "Integrity doesn't keep a child fed, Miss Miller. Neither does foolish loyalty to a man who sees you as a project, not a person. My card, should you reconsider." He placed a business card on the railing and walked away, not looking back as he returned to his waiting car. Grace closed the door with shaking hands, holding Noah close as she watched through the window until Reynolds's car disappeared down the drive. Only then did she allow herself to sink onto the couch, her mind racing. Who was this man? What was his connection to Michael? And, more troublingly, how had he known about her background, about the precise nature of her situation? She glanced at the clock. Michael had mentioned stopping by around 4 o'clock to discuss a new project he wanted her input on. Should she tell him about Reynolds's visit? Or would that only add to the burden he already carried, the tension she'd observed growing daily? In the end, the decision was made for her. When Michael arrived, one look at her face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked immediately, concern etched on his face. The concern in his voice, genuine and immediate, made her decision for her. She told him everything. Reynolds's visit, his offer, his veiled threats, his implications about Michael's reputation, about her being a distraction. Michael's expression darkened as she spoke, his jaw tightening, his normally gentle eyes hardening with anger. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Grace," he said finally, his voice low and tight. "Victor Reynolds is a problem I should have anticipated. I didn't think he'd go this far." "Who is he?" Grace asked. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My chief competitor. We've been in a business battle for years. Recently, he's been trying to orchestrate a hostile takeover of Carter Investments. And it's been consuming a lot of your attention," Grace finished aloud. "And I'm making it worse. Being here working for you is creating rumors, affecting your reputation." Michael's expression softened. "You're not the problem, Grace. Reynolds is. He's exploiting societal assumptions, trying to use you as leverage. It's manipulative and despicable, and I won't let him succeed." "But he was right about one thing," Grace said quietly. "In 2 more weeks, Noah and I will need to leave. And then what?" The question hung in the air between them, weighty with implications neither was ready to address. "We'll figure it out," Michael promised, his voice firm. "Together. Don't let Reynolds get into your head. That's exactly what he wants." Later that evening, after Michael had returned to the main house, Grace sat by the fire, Noah sleeping peacefully in his crib upstairs. She thought about Reynolds's offer, the security it promised, the independence. She thought about Michael, his kindness, his growing troubles, the complications her presence was creating in his life. The rational choice seemed clear. Accept Reynolds's offer. Remove herself as a distraction in Michael's life. Secure a future for Noah that didn't depend on temporary charity. But something deeper, something more instinctive, rebelled at the thought. Victor Reynolds had looked at her and seen a pawn, a tool to be used against Michael. He hadn't seen Grace the artist, Grace the mother, Grace the survivor. He had seen only what she could be worth to him in his game of corporate chess. Michael had seen her. From that first moment on the bench, he had seen her humanity, her struggle, her strength. He had offered help without diminishment, opportunity without exploitation. Whatever complications existed between them now, that fundamental recognition of her personhood remained sacred. Grace opened her sketchbook, turning to a blank page. She began to draw. Not the estate, not Noah, not the past or possible futures. She drew Michael as she had seen him earlier that day. Righteous anger in defense of her dignity, determination to protect her from Reynolds's manipulation, absolute certainty that she was worth defending. The drawing took shape beneath her fingers. Strength and vulnerability perfectly balanced. The complexity of a man carrying burdens she was only beginning to understand. When she finished, Grace studied the image, suddenly aware of what it revealed, not just about Michael, but about herself, about the feelings that had been growing quietly but persistently since that Christmas Eve when their lives had intersected. She closed the sketchbook quickly, as if shutting away a truth she wasn't ready to face. But the knowledge remained, hovering at the edges of her consciousness, impossible to fully ignore. Grace Miller was falling in love with Michael Carter, and nothing could be more dangerous to the fragile security she had found. The next morning brought heavy snow and a call from Mrs. Hill. Michael had been called back to the city unexpectedly. An emergency board meeting, something to do with Reynolds's latest maneuver. He would be gone for at least 2 days. The news should have brought relief, time to sort through her confused feelings, to rebuild her emotional defenses. Instead, Grace felt a hollow disappointment that she couldn't justify even to herself. Kelly, deprived of her father's company and school due to the snowstorm, appeared at the cottage shortly after breakfast, hopeful for companionship. Grace welcomed her, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. They spent the morning baking cookies, making snow angels outside the cottage, reading stories by the fire. Kelly's bright presence filled the cottage with laughter, with normalcy, with the simple joy of childhood that Grace had feared Noah might never experience. After lunch, while Noah and Kelly both napped, the little girl curled on the couch under a blanket, the baby in his crib upstairs. Grace checked her work email. There was a message from Jason, Michael's assistant, with a new project attached. Designs for the annual Carter Foundation Charity Gala to be held in 3 weeks. Grace opened the attached brief, reading through the requirements. It was a significant project, far beyond the simple internal graphics she'd been creating. This was public-facing work, high-profile, with her name attached as the designer, the kind of project that could form the cornerstone of a professional portfolio. A note at the bottom of the brief caught her attention. Mr. Carter specifically requested your involvement in this project, citing your exceptional artistic sensibility. Grace stared at those words, a complex emotion rising in her chest. This wasn't charity work thrown her way out of pity. This was recognition of her skills, her talents, her value beyond her circumstances. She began sketching immediately, ideas flowing faster than she could capture them. The gala's theme was new beginnings, a celebration of second chances, of renewal, of hope rising from adversity. It resonated deeply with Grace, with her own journey, with the unexpected turn her life had taken since Christmas Eve. She was so absorbed in her work that she barely registered the sound of a car in the driveway. Only when a sharp knock came at the door did she look up, startled. Setting aside her sketchbook, she moved to answer, expecting perhaps Mrs. Hill checking on them. Instead, she found a woman, elegant, expensively dressed, with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob and calculating eyes. Beside her stood a man with a professional camera, his expression bored but attentive. Grace felt her stomach drop. Something about the woman's smile, predatory, triumphant, sent warning signals racing through her mind. Grace Miller? The woman asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Vanessa Winters, New York social scene. I was hoping for a quick interview about your arrangement with Michael Carter. Grace began to close the door, but the woman's next words stopped her. I should mention we already have photos of you and the Carter child. Quite cozy making cookies this morning. Were you playing Happy Families? Grace felt a cold fear grip her chest. Kelly. They had photographs of Kelly. You need to leave, Grace said, her voice low but firm. Now the woman's smile widened. Or what? You'll call security, the police, and tell them what? That journalists are investigating why a homeless woman and her baby are living on Michael Carter's estate? That would make an even better story, don't you think? Behind Grace, a small voice called out sleepily. Grace, who's at the door? Kelly had woken from her nap and was padding toward the door in sock feet, rubbing her eyes. The photographer immediately raised his camera. Something protective and fierce rose in Grace. She stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind her, positioning herself between the strangers and the cottage where both children slept. "You will not photograph that child," she said, her voice steady with a strength she'd forgotten she possessed. "You will not exploit her for whatever story you're trying to create." The woman's smile faltered slightly in the face of Grace's unexpected ferocity. "The public has a right to know what's happening here," she countered. "Michael Carter, grieving widower, takes in a homeless young blonde woman who bears a striking resemblance to his late wife. It writes itself, really." Grace felt as though she'd been slapped. The comparison to Sarah, the implication of impropriety, the reduction of Michael's kindness to something tawdry, sickened her. "Mr. Carter offered shelter to a homeless mother and child on Christmas Eve," Grace said coldly. "There's your story. Now leave before I call the police for trespassing and harassment of a minor." The photographer lowered his camera slightly, looking uncertain, but the woman pressed on. "Reynolds Investments is very interested in the impact your presence is having on Carter's business decisions. They've offered quite a substantial fee for an exclusive." And there it was, the connection to Victor Reynolds, the manipulation laid bare. "Get off this property," Grace said, her voice like steel. "Now." Perhaps sensing she would get nothing useful, the woman shrugged. "We have what we need anyway. Look for the article next week. Carter's Christmas charity case. Compassion or calculated distraction? Catchy, don't you think?" They turned to leave, the woman's heels clicking on the frozen driveway as they returned to their car. Grace watched until they drove away, her heart pounding, her mind racing. When she returned inside, Kelly was sitting on the couch, confusion on her small face. Who were those people? Just lost travelers looking for directions. Grace lied, hating the deception but unwilling to frighten the child. "Let's check on Noah, shall we? Then maybe we can finish our cookies." That evening, after Mrs. Hill had collected Kelly for dinner at the main house, Grace paced the cottage living room, Noah watching from his playmat. She needed to tell Michael about the reporters, about the threatened article, about Reynolds' apparent connection to the press invasion. But calling him during his emergency board meeting seemed irresponsible, potentially damaging. She was still deliberating when her phone rang, Michael's number flashing on the screen. "Grace." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "I just received a call from Vanessa Winters seeking comment on our relationship." "What happened?" Grace told him everything. The unexpected visit, the photographer, the threats, the mention of Reynolds, her fierce protection of Kelly from their cameras. Michael was silent for a long moment after she finished. "I'm coming back tonight," he said finally. "This has gone too far." "No," Grace countered. "That's exactly what they want. To disrupt your business meetings, to make you appear distracted, irresponsible. Handle what you need to in the city. Kelly is safe with Mrs. Hill. Noah and I are fine." Another silence. Then, "You're remarkable, Grace Miller. Do you know that?" The warmth in his voice, even through the phone, made her heart skip. "I'm a survivor," she replied simply. "I've faced worse than tabloid journalists." Michael sighed. "This is my fault. I should have anticipated Reynolds would stoop this low. I'm sorry you and Noah have been dragged into my business problems." Grace thought of Reynolds's visit, of his offer, of the simplest solution to Michael's troubles. Maybe Noah and I should accept Reynolds's offer," she said quietly. "Remove ourselves as a distraction. Make things simpler for you." "Absolutely not." Michael's response was immediate, vehement. "That's exactly what he wants, Grace. Please promise me you won't contact him." The intensity of his reaction surprised her. "I promise," she said. "But Michael, we need to be realistic. In less than 2 weeks our month here ends. Noah and I need a plan, and you need your life back, your reputation intact." When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost vulnerable. "What if I don't want my life back? What if these past weeks with you and Noah here, with Kelly happier than she's been in years? What if this feels more right than anything has since Sarah died?" The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Grace's breath caught, her hand tightening on the phone. "Michael," she began, unsure what would follow. He cut her off gently. We don't need to figure everything out tonight. Just don't make any decisions until I get back. Please. Okay. She agreed, her voice barely a whisper. Be careful, Michael. After they hung up, the silence in the cottage felt deafening. Grace stood at the window, watching snow begin to fall again, thick and silent in the gathering darkness. Michael's words echoed in her mind, stirring possibilities she hadn't dared consider. Grace stood at the window, watching the snow start up again, falling thick and silent as the darkness deepened. Michael's words played back in her head, stirring up ideas she hadn't let herself even dream about. Ideas that were both exciting and scary because of what they could lead to. No matter what way they decided to go forward, one thing was becoming super clear. It wasn't going to be easy. Reynolds, the media, the board, and the complicated feelings growing between them, all of that was standing in the way of any future where both of their families could be together. But as she watched the snow change the way everything looked, covering up the old stuff with clean, perfect white, Grace felt a little bit of hope start to grow. New starts were possible. She had already come so far from that freezing bench on Christmas Eve. Maybe the journey wasn't over yet. Later that night, as Grace was sketching out ideas for the charity gala, her phone buzzed with an email alert. The person who sent it was someone she didn't know, but the subject line made her blood run cold. Preliminary copy for review. Carter's Christmas charity case. Her hands shaking, she opened the email and found the article that Vanessa Winters was planning to publish, sent secretly from what looked like a staff account at the magazine. The article was even worse than Grace had imagined. It had hints about her relationship with Michael, guesses about how much she looked like his dead wife, and questions about whether he was making good decisions, whether he was stable, and whether he was fit to run his company. Along with the words were pictures. Grace and Kelly baking cookies, seen through the cottage window. Grace standing protectively on the porch, and even worse, an old picture that must have been taken when she was living on the streets, showing her and Noah huddled on the bench where Michael had found them. Grace felt physically sick, like her privacy had been violated, like innocent moments had been twisted into something dirty, like her past struggles were being used against her. But under the shock, something else was growing. Determination. A strong feeling that she wouldn't let herself be used to hurt the man who had been nothing but kind to her. She sent the email to Michael with a simple note. I think someone at the magazine doesn't agree with this article. Thought you should see it. He answered in minutes. My lawyers will handle this. I'm coming home first thing tomorrow. Grace, none of this is your fault. Remember that. Grace put her phone down and went back to her sketching, but her mind was somewhere else, on Michael, on the fight he was fighting, on how she was accidentally playing a part in it, and on the feelings that had grown between them, now made even more complicated by outside threats and public attention. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to be Victor Reynolds' pawn. She wasn't going to let her story, her struggles, or her relationship with the Carters be turned into a weapon for corporate gain. She had survived worse than this. She would survive this too, and she would do it with her head held high. As midnight got closer, Grace put away her sketchbook and checked on Noah, who was sleeping peacefully in his crib. She gently touched his cheek. This child, who has been both the hardest thing I've ever done and the source of all my strength, she whispered. For you, whatever happens, whatever it takes, I will build us a future that you deserve. Outside, the snow kept falling, quietly changing the world, covering up the old and making way for the new. Grace watched it for a long time, and in its quiet strength, she saw a reflection of her own journey. From darkness to light, from being alone to connecting with others, from just surviving to maybe actually living again. Grace paced around the living room of the cottage, her phone pressed to her ear, her heart pounding as she waited to hear Michael's voice. She had tried to focus on her work all morning, but she kept thinking about the boardroom in New York, where Michael's future was being decided. Noah was playing happily on his blanket, not knowing about the stress in his mother's body. The way her eyes kept checking the clock, the driveway, and her silent phone. When it finally rang, and Michael's name showed up on the screen, Grace almost dropped it trying to answer. Michael? She said, her voice showing how worried she was. What happened? The line was quiet for a second that felt like forever. Then Michael's voice came through, sounding strained but steady. They voted against Reynolds's offer. 7-5. We keep control of the company. Grace felt so relieved that her knees almost gave out. She sank onto the couch. Thank God, she breathed. Michael, that's wonderful news. He laughed, sounding tired but real. It was close. Too close. But we won this round. Reynolds isn't giving up, but we've bought time and made ourselves stronger. When will you be home? Grace asked, then stopped herself, suddenly realizing how domestic the question sounded, what it implied. Michael's voice got softer. I like hearing you call it that, home. I should be back by dinner. There's paperwork and statements to the press, but Grace, I can't wait to see both of you. The simple honesty, the clear affection in his voice, made Grace's heart swell. We'll be here, she promised. After hanging up, Grace went back to the kitchen where Mrs. Hill and Kelly were making cookies. A smile she couldn't hide brightened her face. Good news? Mrs. Hill asked, sounding casual but watching her closely. Grace nodded. The board voted to keep the company. They rejected Reynolds's offer. Mrs. Hill almost smiled. Well, that is good news indeed. Kelly looked up from cutting cookies, her cheeks dusted with flour. Does that mean Daddy's coming home? Yes, sweetheart, Grace said, her heart warming at how happy the little girl looked. He'll be home for dinner. The afternoon flew by as they finished the cookies, tidied up the cottage, and helped Kelly make a welcome home sign for her dad. Grace found herself humming as she moved around, noticing Mrs. Hill watching her knowingly. Later, as Mrs. Hill was about to take Kelly back to the main house to get ready for dinner, she stopped at the cottage door. Miss Miller, she said, keeping her usual formality. I feel I should apologize for my initial reservations about your presence here. Grace looked up, surprised. There's no need, Mrs. Hill. Your concern for the Carters was completely understandable. The older woman's expression softened slightly. Perhaps, but I failed to see what Mr. Carter saw immediately. Your character, your dignity despite your circumstances, and your devotion to your child. These are qualities I should have recognized sooner. Grace felt surprisingly touched by the woman's words, by the approval she was giving. Thank you, Mrs. Hill. That means a lot coming from you. The housekeeper nodded once, a gesture that somehow showed both that she understood and that she had a certain reserved affection. Mr. Carter said he would be dining at the cottage this evening. I've taken the liberty of preparing something special. It should be delivered shortly. Grace smiled, touched by how thoughtful that was. That's very kind. Thank you. After they left, Grace moved around the cottage with more energy, tidying the kitchen, freshening up, and changing Noah into his cutest outfit. Her actions felt important, like she wasn't just getting ready for dinner, but for the start of something new and important. When Michael arrived with a bottle of champagne and a small gift bag, the smile that lit up his face when he saw her made Grace's breath catch. This wasn't the smile of someone offering charity or even friendship. This was the smile of someone coming home to someone he loved. Dinner was a quiet celebration. The meal Mrs. Hill had sent over turned out to be Michael's favorites. They opened the champagne to celebrate the board's decision, and the conversation flowed easily between them. Noah sat in his high chair, sometimes babbling as if he were joining in, making them both laugh. Jason tells me your designs for the gala have been unanimously approved, Michael said as they finished their meal. The event planner called them inspired and perfectly aligned with the foundation's mission. Grace felt a flush of pride. It's a meaningful theme, new beginnings. It resonated with me. Michael looked into her eyes across the table. With me too, more than ever. After dinner, as they settled on the couch in front of the fire, with Noah sleeping peacefully in his portable crib nearby, Michael handed Grace the small gift bag he had brought. What's this? She asked, surprised. Open it and see. Inside, Grace found a small velvet box. Her heart pounded as she opened it, expecting to see jewelry, but instead finding a key. She looked up, confused. Michael smiled, looking a little nervous. It's a key to a storefront in Greenwich Village, commercial space, excellent natural light, recently renovated. As well, it could be a gallery. Your gallery? Grace stared at him, stunned. Michael, I can't accept this. It's too much. He shook his head. It's not a gift, Grace. It's an investment in your talent, in your future. The space is leased for a year under the name Miller Fine Arts. What you do with it is entirely up to you. Grace ran her finger over the key, feeling emotional. Why? She finally asked. Michael's expression became serious. Because I believe in you. Because your art deserves to be seen. Because I want Noah to grow up seeing his mother achieve her dreams, not just survive. He paused, gathering his thoughts. You once told me that single mothers without degrees or portfolios aren't in high demand in the art world. I want to challenge that idea. Your work speaks for itself. The gala designs prove that. This space gives you the opportunity to let more people hear what it's saying. Grace looked down at the key in her hand. His weight felt both scary and exciting. This wasn't charity. It was opportunity, a chance to get back on the path she had been forced to leave, to become more than just someone who survived. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Michael reached across and covered her hand with his hand warm and steady. You don't need to say anything now. The lease doesn't start until March. You have time to think, to plan, to decide what you want. Grace nodded, closing her fingers around the key. Thank you for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself. Michael's smile was gentle. We all need someone to remind us of who we are under all the stuff that life throws at us. You've done that for me too, Grace, more than you know. The days before the gala were a whirlwind. With the board vote behind him, Michael focused on making Carter Investments stronger against any future attempts to take over, and getting ready for the foundation's annual gala. Grace threw herself into finishing the designs for the event, working with the event planners to make sure every detail showed the theme of new beginnings. They spent their evenings together at the estate, sometimes at the cottage, sometimes at the main house. The lines between the spaces were starting to blur more and more. Kelly was thriving in this growing family, getting closer to both Grace and Noah, and filling the rooms that had once been so quiet after her mother's death with her laughter. Grace found herself settling into a rhythm she had never expected. Professional satisfaction in her work, happiness in her everyday interactions with Kelly, and peace in her growing closeness with Michael. The key to the gallery stayed in her bedside drawer, a promise she would sometimes take out at night, turning it over in her fingers and imagining what could be. A week before the gala, Michael came to Grace with a small velvet pouch. The foundation board has a tradition, he explained, handing her the pouch. The designer of the gala materials receives a special gift, a token of appreciation for capturing the spirit of the year's theme. Grace opened the pouch and poured what was inside into her palm. A delicate silver necklace fell out. It was a simple pendant of a rising sun, its rays reaching out in elegant lines. It's beautiful, she whispered. New beginnings, Michael said softly. The dawn after darkness. Seemed fitting. His fingers brushed hers as he took the necklace, moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. Grace felt the warm weight of the pendant against her skin, just above her heart. Perfect, Michael murmured, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. Grace turned to face him, the emotions of the past weeks coming together into a certainty. Michael, she began. After the gala, after our month here is officially over, what happens then with us? His expression grew serious and vulnerable in a way that made her heart ache. What do you want to happen, Grace? She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I want to stop pretending this is temporary. I want Kelly and Noah to have the family they both deserve. She hesitated, then kept going. I want us to build something real together, something lasting. Michael's eyes never left hers, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I've wanted that since the night I saw you stand up to Reynolds, maybe even before. But I needed to be sure you weren't choosing this out of gratitude or because you had to, that you were choosing me because it's what you truly want. Grace stepped closer, raising her hand to touch his face. I am choosing with clear eyes and an open heart. I'm choosing you, Michael Carter. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close with a gentle certainty. And I choose you, Grace Miller. I think I've been choosing you since that Christmas Eve at the bus stop. When their lips met, it felt like coming home, not to a place, but to a person, to the knowledge that no matter what paths lay ahead, they would walk them together. The night of the gala arrived, crisp and clear, with stars shining brightly in the winter sky. Grace stood in the guest bedroom of the main house, no longer just a guest room, but hers now, filled with her clothes, her sketches, and Noah's toys, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was almost unrecognizable from the one who had huddled on a bench 2 months ago. She was wearing a midnight blue gown that Michael had insisted on having custom-made. Her blonde hair styled in elegant waves, and the silver sun pendant was catching the light at her throat. But the biggest change was in her eyes. They were no longer haunted by fear and hardship. Now they held hope, purpose, and joy. There was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Hill came in, her expression softening when she saw Grace. "You look beautiful, my dear," the older woman said, dropping her usual formality. "Mr. Carter asked me to give you this." She held out a small jewelry box. Inside, Grace found another necklace, a simple silver star on a delicate chain. "It was Sarah's," Mrs. Hill explained gently. "She wore it to every foundation event." Mr. Carter thought. He thought she would want you to have it now. Grace touched the star with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the meaning of the gesture. Michael wasn't asking her to replace Sarah, to erase his past. He was honoring what had been while embracing what could be, a continuation, not a replacement. "Mrs. Hill," Grace said softly, "would it be okay to wear both, the sun and the star?" The older woman's eyes glistened. "I think it would be perfect, the sun for your new beginning, and the star for the light that guided you here." Mrs. Hill helped Grace take off the sun pendant, then fastened the star around her neck. Once it was secure, she reattached the sun on a shorter chain so that both pendants lay against Grace's skin, complementing each other. "There," the housekeeper said, her voice sounding a little rough. "Perfect." Downstairs, Michael was waiting in the foyer, looking handsome in his tuxedo. His expression changed to one of wonder as Grace came down the stairs, his eyes moving from her face to the pendants at her throat, understanding dawning in his gaze. "You are breathtaking," he said simply when she reached him. Grace touched the star, then the sun. "Thank you for this, for everything." Michael took her hand and raised it to his lips. "Tonight is about new beginnings," he said, "about honoring the past while embracing the future." Kelly, looking stunning in a child-sized gown of pale pink, was bouncing around excitedly nearby. Noah was already asleep upstairs under Mrs. Hill's watchful care. The foundation gala was no place for a baby, but Michael had promised a special family celebration the next day, the official end of Grace's month at the cottage, and the beginning of their life together. The drive to New York went by quickly, filled with Kelly's excited chatter about the party, about seeing her father's colleagues, and about staying up super late like a grown-up. Grace watched the scenery go by, the city lights getting brighter as they got closer, and thought about how much had changed since she had last seen the skyline. The gala venue was amazing, a historic ballroom transformed by twinkling lights, flowers, and the design elements Grace had created. Her work was everywhere. The New Beginnings logo she had designed was on programs, projections, and table settings. Seeing her vision brought to life on such a large scale, filled her with pride. Michael stayed close to her as they entered, his hand warm at the small of her back. Heads turned and people whispered, but Grace held her head high. She wasn't ashamed of their story, of how they had found each other, or of the love that had grown between them. The evening was filled with introductions, conversations, and moments of beauty. Michael's colleagues were polite, even if they were curious, and the foundation board members were warm and welcoming. Grace found herself actually enjoying the gala, appreciating the opportunity to see the charitable work Michael had built and to understand this part of his life. As they were talking to guests, Michael was called away to speak with a major donor. Grace stood near one of her design displays, admiring how the lighting enhanced the imagery, when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Well, if it isn't the Christmas miracle herself. Grace turned to see Victor Reynolds watching her, holding a champagne glass and looking coldly amused. "Mr. Reynolds," she acknowledged, keeping her voice steady. "I'm surprised to see you here." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I make a point of keeping my enemies close, Miss Miller. Besides, I wouldn't miss the debut of Michael Carter's latest acquisition." Grace felt anger rising inside her, but she kept her expression neutral. "Is that how you see relationships, Mr. Reynolds? As acquisitions? As business transactions? That explains a lot about your tactics." Reynolds's smile faltered slightly. "You think you know me based on business decisions, on strategies to make more money. I know you see people as ways to get what you want," Grace replied calmly. "As tools to be used, not as people to be respected. I know you offered me a position not because you valued my skills, but because you thought it would hurt Michael. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Reynolds studied her, and something like surprise flickered in his eyes. "You're more perceptive than I thought, Ms. Miller. But you're naive if you think what you and Michael have is anything but temporary. Men like him don't marry women they find on street corners." Grace felt the insult hit its mark, and old insecurities stirred, but she pushed them aside, finding strength in what she knew to be true. "Men like Michael," she said quietly, "see beyond circumstances to character, beyond appearances to what's inside. That's why he'll always be a better man than you, Mr. Reynolds, and why he'll always win against you in the long run." Before Reynolds could answer, Michael appeared at Grace's side, his expression darkening when he saw the other man. "Reynolds," he said coldly, "I don't remember seeing your name on the guest list." Reynolds smiled thinly. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill, Michael. I wanted to personally congratulate you on the board's decision this round, at least." Michael's arm slipped around Grace's waist, a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "There won't be another round, Victor. The shareholders have been fully briefed on your tactics, on what your takeover would mean for the company and for the foundation. You've lost this fight." Reynolds's expression hardened. "We'll see," he said simply, then turned to Grace. "It was educational meeting you properly, Miss Miller. I suspect we'll cross paths again." As he walked away, Grace felt tension she hadn't even realized she was holding release from her shoulders. "Are you okay?" Michael asked softly. "What did he say to you?" Grace shook her head. "Nothing important, nothing true." Michael studied her face, looking concerned. "Grace, if he threatened you, if he said anything." She gently placed a finger on his lips, stopping his words. "He tried to make me doubt you, doubt us. He failed." The worry in Michael's expression melted into something warmer and deeper. "Reynolds believes everyone has a price, that everything is a transaction," Michael said quietly. "He can't understand relationships built on anything other than what they can get out of it. I almost feel sorry for him." Grace leaned into Michael's embrace, drawing strength from his steadiness. "It's a cold way to live," she agreed. "Never trusting, never connecting, always calculating." Michael's arm tightened around her waist. "I have something I want to share with you," he said, guiding her toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. "Something I've been thinking about since the board vote." Curious, Grace followed him to a small alcove where the sounds of the gala were muffled, creating a bubble of privacy. "What is it?" she asked. Michael took both her hands in his expression serious but also excited. "I'm restructuring Carter Investments, creating a new division focused on art investment and promotion, discovering new talent, supporting emerging artists, creating galleries in underserved communities. The board approved it yesterday." Grace's eyes widened. "Michael, that's wonderful. But why are you telling me this like it's a secret?" His smile was warm, slightly nervous. "Because I want you to run it, Grace, to be its director. Your gallery would be the flagship, but you'd be responsible for the entire division, mentoring other artists, creating opportunities, building something meaningful." Grace felt like she couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a gallery space. This was a career, a purpose, a chance to help others who had been overlooked or abandoned by the traditional art world. I don't have the experience, she stammered. The credentials. You have the talent, Michael interrupted gently. The vision, the understanding of what it means to be excluded, to have doors closed. Who better to open those doors for others? Grace's mind raced, possibilities unfolding before her. Not just her own success, but the chance to lift others, to create paths where none had existed. You believe I could do this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael's gaze was steady and certain. I know you can. I've seen how you think, how you create, how you empathize. This isn't charity, Grace. It's recognizing what you bring to the table. It's me seeing you, all of you, not just your circumstances. Grace felt tears welling up, overwhelmed by his faith in her. Overwhelming. I don't know what to say, she breathed, her voice barely audible. Michael's grip on her hands tightened reassuringly. Just say you'll think about it. That's all I'm asking for now. Before Grace could answer, the director of the foundation approached them, letting Michael know it was time for his annual address. He gave her hands a gentle squeeze, promising they'd continue their conversation later, and then followed the director toward the stage. Grace watched him walk away, her heart and mind swirling with a mix of emotions. The possibilities he'd presented to her were both incredibly exciting and incredibly daunting. Having her own gallery was one thing, a dream she'd barely dared to whisper to herself. But this was different. This was a huge responsibility, a powerful platform, a real chance to reshape an entire industry that had systematically excluded people like her. As the lights dimmed and the audience's attention shifted to the stage, Grace found herself holding her breath, a nervous anticipation building in her chest. She felt like she was standing on the precipice of an entirely new life. Michael stood confidently before the crowd, commanding attention with a natural ease. The foundation's director had introduced him with glowing praise, highlighting the year's accomplishments, the lives that had been changed, the hope that had been restored. Now, Michael stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the audience until it found Grace. He held her gaze for a moment before addressing the assembled guests. This year's theme, New Beginnings, is deeply personal to me, he began, his voice resonating clearly through the hushed room, filling the space with warmth and sincerity. Just 2 months ago, on Christmas Eve, my daughter Kelly and I encountered a young woman and her infant son at a bus stop. They had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. What happened next changed all of our lives forever. Grace felt every eye in the room turn to her, a wave of scrutiny washing over her. But she held her head high, unashamed of her past and immensely proud of the journey she had undertaken. That night taught me that new beginnings often come disguised as endings. Michael continued, his voice laced with emotion. That hope can be found even in the darkest of moments. That family isn't always defined by blood, but by love, by choice, by the courage to open your heart again. He turned to Grace, his gaze locking with hers across the crowded room, a silent message passing between them. Grace Miller taught me that. She and her son Noah showed me that loss doesn't have to be the end of the story. That second chances are possible and that love can bloom in the most unexpected of circumstances. His words resonated deeply within Grace's soul, validating not just their relationship, but her worth as a person, her journey, and everything she had endured to reach this point. The foundation exists to create new beginnings for those who need them most, Michael concluded, his voice filled with passion and conviction. To offer not just assistance, but dignity, not just resources, but respect, not just charity, but genuine opportunity. That mission has never felt more meaningful to me than it does tonight. The applause that erupted was thunderous, a wave of appreciation and support washing over the room, but Grace barely heard it. Her focus remained solely on Michael, on the intensity of his gaze meeting hers across the room, and on the undeniable love reflected in his eyes. The remainder of the gala passed by in a blur of emotions. Grace found herself dancing in Michael's arms, accepting congratulations on her designs, and fielding curious but mostly kind questions about their unconventional meeting. Throughout it all, Michael remained steadfastly by her side, his presence a constant source of strength and reassurance. His hand often found hers, as if he couldn't bear not to touch her, not to reassure himself that she was really there. As midnight approached, they quietly slipped away from the celebration, leaving the glittering ballroom behind. Kelly, already half asleep, nestled sleepily between them as they made their way to the waiting car. The little girl drifted off almost instantly as they began the drive back to the city, her head resting comfortably against Grace's arm, one small hand still clutching her fancy party favor, a tangible reminder of the magical evening. "She adores you," Michael said softly, glancing at his daughter with a tender smile. "You've brought something back into her life that I couldn't provide alone." Grace gently brushed a stray curl away from Kelly's forehead. "She makes it easy to love her." Michael's eyes met hers in the dim interior of the car, the city lights casting dancing shadows across their faces. "And me? Do I make it easy?" The vulnerability in his question tugged at Grace's heartstrings, stirring a deep well of emotion within her. "No," she answered honestly, her voice barely a whisper. "Loving you is terrifying because it matters so much, because losing it would hurt too deeply." "And yet," he prompted, his voice laced with anticipation, "and yet, I do love you with everything I am." His hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of unspoken intimacy and connection. "I love you too, Grace Miller. I think I have since that night on the bench, even though I didn't fully recognize it then." The city lights reflected in the car windows, painting shimmering patterns across their joined hands, a visual representation of their intertwined lives. In the back seat, Kelly slept peacefully, completely untroubled by the quiet declarations of love unfolding around her, oblivious to the weight of the moment. "What happens now?" Grace asked softly, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Tomorrow is officially the end of my month at the cottage." Michael's smile was gentle, but certain, radiating confidence and love. "Tomorrow is the beginning of the rest of our lives together. If that's what you want." "It is," he whispered, the words carrying a weight of unspoken emotion. They arrived back at the penthouse, and Michael carefully carried the sleeping Kelly inside, while Grace followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest. After settling the little girl in her room, they found themselves drawn to the balcony, despite the cold night air. Snow had begun to fall, delicate flakes drifting silently through the darkness, gradually covering the city below in a pristine white blanket. Michael stood beside Grace, watching the snow fall, his expression thoughtful and serene. "I had planned to do this at the cottage tomorrow," he said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "To bring everything full circle, but I don't want to wait any longer." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, his movements deliberate and filled with a sense of purpose. Grace's breath caught in her throat as he opened the box, revealing a ring that shimmered and sparkled in the moonlight. It was elegant and vintage, featuring a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. "This was my grandmother's," Michael explained, his voice steady despite the obvious emotion in his eyes. "Sarah never wore it. She had her own engagement ring. I think it was waiting for you, Grace, for this moment." He knelt before her, the falling snow gathering on his shoulders, his gaze never wavering from hers. "Grace Miller," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "You came into my life when I thought the best parts of me had died with Sarah. You showed me that the heart can heal, that love can grow again, and that family can be found in the most unexpected places. You and Noah have brought light back into our lives, mine and Kelly's. Will you marry me, Grace? Will you make our family complete?" Grace looked down at this man, this good, kind, honorable man who had seen her at her lowest and recognized her worth, who had offered help without diminishing her, and love without conditions. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy welling up in her eyes and streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, Michael, with all my heart. Yes." He gently slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms, holding her close. His kiss was a promise of all that was to come. A life together, a family united, and a love born from compassion that had grown into something deep and lasting. As they held each other beneath the falling snow, Grace thought about the long and arduous journey that had brought her to this moment. From desperation to hope, from mere survival to genuine joy, and from isolating loneliness to a profound sense of belonging. She thought of Noah, who would grow up knowing a father's love, a sister's devotion, and the security of a loving home. She thought of Kelly, who had found in Grace the mother figure she had lost too young. And she thought of Michael, who had risked his heart again despite his grief, who had seen in her not a charity case, but a partner, an equal, and a love worth fighting for. The months that followed were filled with changes, both profound and ordinary, weaving together to create a rich and fulfilling tapestry of life. Grace and Noah moved permanently into the main house, embracing their new life within its walls. However, they also kept the cottage as a cherished weekend retreat and a bright, inspiring art studio. The gallery officially opened in Greenwich Village under the meaningful name Miller New Beginnings, showcasing not only Grace's own remarkable work, but also the art of other talented artists who had overcome significant obstacles and challenges in their lives. The new division of Carter Investments quickly gained widespread recognition and respect for its innovative approach to art investment and its unwavering commitment to community engagement, setting a new standard within the industry. Victor Reynolds's relentless attempts to undermine Carter Investments continued, but with diminishing effectiveness as Michael's vision and leadership proved unshakable. The board of directors remained firmly behind Michael, deeply impressed by both his exceptional business acumen and his unwavering commitment to ethical practices and social responsibility. Eventually, Reynolds, realizing the futility of his efforts, turned his attention to easier targets, his defeat at Michael's hands becoming little more than a footnote in the annals of the business press. The wedding was planned for the spring, an intimate ceremony held on the beautiful Connecticut estate, surrounded by the blossoming beauty of the season. Grace found herself happily absorbed in the wedding preparations, in nurturing her burgeoning gallery, and in relishing the daily joys of their expanding family. Noah took his very first steps in the penthouse living room, a moment of pure joy and celebration. Kelly lost her first tooth, marking another milestone in her young life, and life in general moved forward with a rhythm that felt both miraculous and utterly natural. Christmas Eve arrived once again, marking exactly 1 year since that fateful night at the bus stop that had changed their lives forever. Michael suggested they take a drive into the city, just the two of them, while Mrs. Hill lovingly watched over the children. Grace understood immediately where they were going, her heart swelling with emotion as they approached the quiet bus stop near Rockefeller Center. The bench was empty now, dusted with a fresh layer of snow, the familiar bus route sign flickering above it, just as it had on that cold and fateful night. Michael took Grace's hand as they stood looking at it, both lost in their own memories of how their incredible story had begun. "I almost kept walking," Michael admitted quietly, his voice filled with a sense of wonder and gratitude. "If Kelly hadn't insisted." Grace squeezed his hand reassuringly. "But she did insist, and you listened. And here we are," Michael finished, his eyes sparkling with love. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the snow falling gently around them, the sounds of the bustling city muffled by the winter air. "I want to do something," Michael said suddenly, his voice filled with a newfound determination. "A tradition, maybe, to remember." He explained his idea, outlining his vision for establishing a program through the foundation to provide emergency housing on Christmas Eve for homeless families, ensuring that no one would have to spend the holiday as Grace and Noah had a year ago. Each family would receive not just shelter from the cold, but also opportunities for a better future. Access to education, job training, childcare, and whatever else they needed to rebuild their lives and achieve their dreams. "We'll call it the Bench Project," he suggested, his voice filled with emotion. A reminder that sometimes the most important journeys begin in the most unexpected places. Grace felt tears well up in her eyes, deeply touched by the generosity and compassion of his vision. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. a way to transform what happened to us into hope for others. They returned to Connecticut that evening to find the house aglow with festive lights, the warm and inviting scene radiating joy and anticipation. Kelly and Noah were waiting excitedly with Mrs. Hill, eager to share their day's adventures. The children had spent the afternoon making snow angels in the yard, and Kelly insisted on showing off their creations before dinner. Hand in hand, the family walked through the snowy grounds to a clearing where 4 perfect snow angels lay side by side, their delicate forms illuminated by the soft glow of the porch lights. The snow angels varied in size, some large, some small, their outstretched wings gently touching to form a connected circle, a symbol of their unity. "Look!" Kelly exclaimed proudly, her face beaming with joy. "It's all of us." Michael gently lifted Noah onto his shoulders, the toddler's delighted laughter ringing through the crisp winter air, filling their hearts with warmth. Grace watched them, marveling at this unconventional family that had formed against all odds, and at the incredible love that had blossomed from a single act of compassion. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the winter sunlight sparkling on the fresh snow. The Connecticut estate glowed with holiday decorations, with the warmth of a loving family, and with the unmistakable aura of pure joy. In the main house living room, before the towering and beautifully decorated Christmas tree, the family gathered together. Michael stood beside Grace, his arm lovingly around her shoulders. Noah, now a confident toddler, toddled around the room with tentative steps, his face lit up with excitement. Kelly bounced with anticipation as she helped him unwrap a colorful toy, her infectious energy filling the room. Mrs. Hill moved quietly among them, her usual reserve softened by genuine affection, and by her heartfelt acceptance of the extraordinary family that had formed before her very eyes. Grace wore a simple cream-colored sweater, her stunning engagement ring catching the light with every movement, her hair flowing loosely around her shoulders. She sat beside Michael on the couch, watching as Kelly helped Noah unwrap his gifts, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. The children's laughter filled the space with a melody more beautiful than any Christmas carol, creating a symphony of joy that resonated deep within their souls. "What a difference a year makes," Michael murmured, his arm tightening around her shoulders, his eyes filled with wonder and profound emotion. Grace leaned into him, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. "From that bench to this moment," she agreed softly, her voice filled with awe. "Sometimes, I still can't quite believe it." "Believe it," Michael replied, pressing a tender kiss to her temple. "This is real, Grace. This is home. This is forever." Later that day, as snow began to fall again, soft and gentle in the gathering dusk, the family bundled up in their warmest winter gear to venture outside and enjoy the magical winter wonderland. Kelly insisted they build another snow family, bigger and better than before, their laughter echoing through the crisp air. Noah, secure in Michael's arms, watched with wide-eyed wonder as the snow figures took shape beneath Grace's artistic guidance, her creativity bringing their vision to life. When they finally finished their masterpiece, they stood back to admire their creation. For snow figures of varying sizes stood together against the breathtaking winter landscape, united by the sticks that formed their connected hands, symbolizing the unbreakable bond that held them together. "Look," Kelly said proudly, her voice filled with excitement. "It's us, forever and ever." Grace looked at the child who had become like a daughter to her, at the baby who had grown into a curious and energetic toddler, and at the man who had become her partner, her love, and her future. She knew with absolute certainty that Kelly was right. "Forever and ever," she echoed softly, her voice carrying in the winter stillness, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. As twilight deepened and the Christmas lights began to twinkle against the darkening sky, Grace Miller stood surrounded by the family she had found in the most unexpected place and at the most desperate moment. And she knew with unwavering conviction that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home at last, loved at last, complete at last. Sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come disguised as endings. Sometimes the coldest nights lead to the warmest dawns. Sometimes a single act of kindness can build an entire world. And sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales really do come true. Not always in the way we expect, but always in the way we most need them.